Welcome everybody to another OBA Bar Talk virtual chat. I'm Dave Summers, Executive Director of the Omaha Bar Association, and I am here today with Laurie Heer, the Director of the Volunteer Lawyers Project from the Nebraska State Bar Association, our big brother, big sister down there in Lincoln. Hello, good morning, Laurie.
Good morning, Dave, and thank you for having me. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to talk to the OBA and to let folks know what's happening right now with the VLP and how folks can get involved.
Absolutely. Well, and you've been in the space of public service for so long. Before VLP, you were at Legal Aid. Can you give the viewers your history, your practice history?
Absolutely. Thanks, Dave. So I started Legal Aid, it was probably my first year out of law school. I'd done a little private practice beforehand, then went to Legal Aid. I started there as a litigator, handling a wide variety of cases, and then ultimately moved into their access unit where I was helping oversee access to services. And frankly, that's where I ended up spending most of my career at Legal Aid, was in the access to service unit. I eventually became a manager and then a director through it, and then also did some other things at Legal Aid to help oversee the practice or the firm itself, including grant writing and a little bit of oversight in operations. But, you know, the entire time, I always kept my feet sort of grounded in being able to continue to work with low-income people, to advocate on their behalf. I didn't get to spend nearly as much time in the courtroom, probably as I would have liked to have, but I at least got to speak with them and provide some legal advice, some guidance, help them, particularly when they were representing themselves, so I could help them with the use of forms and other technology that we had at Legal Aid. So I was at Legal Aid for about 17 years when I left there and went to the Bar Association 2 years ago to be the director of the Volunteer Lawyers Project. And the other thing I'll say about the work I did at Legal Aid is when I was helping oversee access to services, I also worked on their private attorney involvement project or program. And that's the program where they contract with private attorneys throughout the state to take cases on a reduced fee basis. And primarily those cases were in the family law area, because of course that's what the greatest need was. But I really, really enjoyed the work, the relationship building that I did with the private bar at that time and the work with the private bar. And so moving over to VLP allowed me to kind of step back into that role where I could have, you know, closer relationships with attorneys practicing throughout the state. And that's probably the part about my job that I love most.
And when we're talking about size and scope, Legal Aid of Nebraska, statewide scope and practice, dozens and dozens of attorneys around the state on staff, and then the private bar attorneys that you're hiring. So that's a large scope. And then VLP, statewide mission and scope, and hundreds of volunteer attorneys, right? With I think three staff in your office directly, and then bar staff to help. It's still a very large scope. We're talking hundreds of attorneys, thousands of cases a year, just really important, big work.
Yes, absolutely. And so one thing I do want to say about our staff, when I came to VLP, there were basically two attorneys, myself and my colleague, and we had basically a part-time law clerk. At one point there had been an administrative assistant, but then there were I think some funding issues there. I don't know all of the history, but we had a part-time law clerk. We have since grown from that. We are now 4 attorneys. So it's myself, and then I supervise 3 others. And I have 2 support staff, a paralegal and basically a legal assistant or administrative assistant. 2 of our staff are dedicated specifically to one particular grant or funding source, and that's the source that allows us to place cases on a reduced fee for victims of crime. The rest of us are funded through other sources and do kind of have, you know, oversee the general work of VLP.
And you talk about funding sources, and sometimes there's confusion on this, but the VLP is a state bar offshoot. It's an entity of the state bar. And so the state bar supports it, but also the Nebraska Lawyers Foundation, am I getting this right, the Lawyers Foundation, when they're raising money at the Barristers Ball and the golf tournament, things like that, they are a good source of funding for VLP?
Yes, they are. So they are two, well, we have basically three prime sources of funding right now. Our largest funder is the Nebraska Commission on Public Advocacy. That's basically our foundational, I don't want to say foundation, but our foundational funding that really supports the project and has been supporting the project for years since it started. In addition to that, we then do receive funding through the Nebraska Lawyers Foundation. And so that is our foundation that receives funds when we do any type of fundraising. So Barristers Ball, annual meeting, other, golf events, those types of things. And then our third main funding source is the Nebraska Crime Commission. So the two folks that I have funded under that are assisting victims of crime with that funding.
And so here's a little, blurb out there. August, I think it's 6th through the 8th is the virtual Barristers Ball. So if you want to support in part what VLP is doing, the Barristers Ball, and then the golf tournament is still on for Dismal River at the end of the month. And so I can find that information on the Nebraska State Bar website and support what you're doing there. This crime commission money, and this is sort of a new thing when people have thought about doing work, volunteering hours with VLP in the past. They're thinking it's a pro bono type situation, but you're talking about a reduced fee representation in family law cases with violence and things like that, right?
Correct, absolutely. So it is reduced fee, and reduced fee still does count as pro bono. That's probably one of the misconceptions most lawyers have. So when you think about it, lawyers who are taking court appointments, who are doing that reduced fee work or doing the reduced fee work through us, that's still considered pro bono. So I always want to make that plug because attorneys don't really know that. And, we always tell them, you may be doing pro bono when you don't even know it, right? It's one of those instances where you're doing pro bono.
Well, and I've done the courthouse, the self-help desk at the courthouse in the past. Obviously, right now, that operation is not going on. It's sort of shifted to that online system where you can respond to people's questions and do it anonymously, or if you want to give them your contact information, you can. Can you talk a little bit about how attorneys right now can log in and do 30 minutes an hour of volunteer work from the safety of their home office?
Absolutely. Thanks, Dave. So I do want to make a comment on the Self-Help Center. Of course, thanking you for all of your work and thanking other members of the bar for their work at the Self-Help Center. It's crucial. And we closed it at the start of the pandemic. Obviously major concerns for the health and safety of volunteers and the folks who are using it. They remain closed at this time. And we are going to, starting August 1st, we will probably assess whether they should reopen at the top of the month, every month for the rest of this year. We know the services are critical. We want to be there, but we also want to acknowledge the health and safety of everyone, volunteers and folks who need the use of it. So just know that we are going to be reevaluating that, and I'll be sending some information out about that. But you're correct in that what we have been doing is asking folks who need the use of the Self-Help Center to log their questions instead in Nebraska Free Legal Answers, where private attorneys can sign up to respond to those questions. So for those who are not familiar with Nebraska Free Legal Answers, it's our online or our virtual, basically I call it our online self-help center because it operates the same way. And so Nebraska Free Legal Answers is actually a website that is produced by the American Bar Association, and it's hosted by the American Bar Association. We administer it here. So VLP administers it in the state of Nebraska. Free Legal Answers has been adopted in 42 or 43 other states, so it's very widely used. And it's administered by different organizations in different states, but by and large, it's usually like a volunteer lawyers project or a legal aid in that state that administers it. And so how this works is low-income people who have civil legal questions, and it's for civil legal questions only, they can post those in Free Legal Answers. Now, in order to do that, they have to sign up. And the sign up process includes a qualification process. So they have to income and asset qualify just as they would if they were going to contact legal aid and receive services. The caveat here, though, is the qualifications are a little bit higher than they would be if they were calling legal aid. So they're at 250% of the federal poverty level. And that is really set by the ABA. That it was set with input by the states who are participating, but we did not set that number, so to speak, ourselves.
Sure.
Asset qualification is, $10,000. So if they have anything over $10,000 in assets, they wouldn't be qualified. That's not typically true for low income people. If they're not going to qualify for a service, it's typically going to be income based and not asset based. So once they get through that process, then the system automatically can approve or disapprove. It's based upon the information they enter. Then they can post their civil legal question. Now, in the past, they were limited to 3 legal questions a year. That has now changed as a result of COVID. So they are now able to post up to 5 legal questions per year. And I don't know if that will continue past this pandemic or whether they'll cut that off, if ABA will cut that off. But right now it's 5, which typically isn't a problem for these folks. Most folks post 1 or 2 questions a year. We don't even tend to see folks who are posting more than that. But they also have to be over the 18 years of age or older, and they can't be incarcerated. So there's some, additional qualifications there. So what happens is they post their question. They can upload documents with their question. So if it's a lease or a contract, or, they've got a question about their divorce decree, they can upload the document. On the other side, we have lawyers logging in who want to answer those questions, who want to do some pro bono work. And I will tell you, this is our most popular pro bono platform we have. Most lawyers love this particular program because it's easy. They can log in anytime, anywhere you have internet access, and you can spend as much time or as little time as you want. And I'll get to that here in a minute. But essentially, what lawyers do is they have to create their profile and log in, provide your bar number. Then we, on the back end of that, have to make sure that the attorney who is signing up to do the work is an attorney in good standing and licensed in Nebraska. Pretty simple. That takes us about 2 seconds to do. Once we've done that, we make the approval. The attorney is set to go. The attorney can then log in. The attorney can see all of the questions that are posed. And we typically have anywhere between, I would say 15 questions up to maybe 40 questions at any given time. Through the pandemic, it's vacillated a lot. There are days when we will have 30 questions, and then there's days where we only have maybe 5 questions. And that's because lawyers, for the most part, are doing a fantastic job going in and getting those questions answered. We have hundreds of lawyers signed up to actually answer questions in Free Legal Answers, and so we are so incredibly grateful for that. But anyway, they log in, they can you can preview the question, or you can look at the question in its entirety. The other thing is you can see the name of the person who's posting the question, and they also have to list the adverse party. Now, the nice thing about this particular program, similar to our self-help centers or our legal clinics that we do, is that you're covered under that specific rule, the ethical rule, that allows you to do this pro bono work without having to conduct a conflict of interest check. Okay, and so at the time that you are viewing this information and viewing the names of the people, that's the level of conflict check that you do. If you recognize the names and you think, uh-oh, I think I'm going to have a problem here, then you simply don't respond. You choose not to answer that question. But if you don't recognize the names, you may proceed. Okay, and the thing about it is the folks who are using this system have to basically sign a disclaimer on the front end indicating they understand that you as the lawyer may have represented the adverse party in the past. You may represent them in the future, but they know that you're not representing them right now. So they're essentially waiving that potential conflict of interest, and they're signing the disclaimer saying they understand that. They're also signing a disclaimer that indicates that the help they're receiving from you is now and only now that this is not expected to extend, beyond this basic question and answer session. So they get all of that information up front and have to agree to it. Now, the lawyer, you as the lawyer, can look at the questions and you can decide how much information you want to provide, or maybe how little information you want to provide. You can also determine whether you need additional information. So on the back end, I can view the questions and I can view the answers. And so I often see that attorneys will go back and forth with individuals and say, you've posed a really interesting question. However, I need additional information to be able to answer that question. And so I would say many times there's a little bit of back and forth before the attorney can fully answer the question, or to at least to the extent they want to. But you don't necessarily have to do that. You can give general legal information and legal advice and say, well, in your situation, I assume X, Y, Z is occurring. And if so, here's the law and here's the response to your question. So you can decide what the extent of that looks like. And you can decide when to basically close out your answer session. And so you can provide one answer and close it out, or you can provide an answer and allow them to have a little bit of back and forth conversation with you. The other nice thing about this platform is your name, bar number, contact information, none of that will ever be disclosed to the individual that you're responding to unless you want that information to be disclosed. You are always going to be known just as volunteer attorney, and all of the communication that occurs within the system actually occurs inside of Free Legal Answers. And so what happens is when the person posts the question and then closes out, once you respond, they get an email to their personal email. They have to log back in to get the response. Okay. So again, your email address is never going directly to them. So there's of course anonymity there, and they just know that you're a licensed attorney in good standing. So it's a very simple process. It's very easy to use. And as I had mentioned before, it's definitely our most popular pro bono program.
And you've really hit on the concerns and questions that I've heard from attorneys, both when we're sitting at the self-help desk or just in conversation, when they have those concerns. They have concerns about anonymity. They have concerns about, being able to sort of end the conversation when they need to. They have concerns about, potential conflicts of interest. And that's basically, you don't have to worry about it. It's all on the up and up, and we respect and appreciate your time. And then the other thing that I think you've done a really good job of is creating this education support for the attorneys that maybe their practice is really complex employment law, and they are logging in and seeing family law cases, and you're giving them the resources to use their legal acumen to take on advising on those cases, and not necessarily saying, I'm going to leave that to the family law attorney, but they can get the information that is helpful to the people that need it, and don't have to necessarily be the attorney that practices in that area to give that advice. Absolutely,
and thanks for pointing that out, Dave, because I had left that out. So within Free Legal Answers itself, there is a resource tab. So you as the attorney can log into that and get basically all of the resources that we list in there for the different substantive areas questions you might see in the different substantive areas. So, we might have a statute uploaded in there, or some other document that helps basically kind of give you the law in bite-sized pieces. I also want to note as well that information is contained on VLP's website. So our website is nevlp.org. We have an incredibly thorough resource tab in there. So, and frankly, there's a lot of information, but if you scroll down and you find the resources for self-help center work, you're going to find pretty much everything you need to answer questions, either A, at the self-help center, or B, in Free Legal Answers. So definitely take a look at those resources. The other thing I do want to mention is that we are currently working on some, I want to call them scripts. So what we would have is basically, if you're asked a question that contains this particular fact pattern, here is a basic advice script to at least get you started for providing a response to this individual, right? And so it makes that job for that attorney so much easier, particularly when you don't necessarily feel like you're experienced in that area of law, or, you know, definitely not an expert in that area of law. I should also mention that law firms will sometimes contact us and they want to do a question answer session where they'll do it around the lunch hour and have, say, a pizza party or something. We've done several of those. In fact, this past week, one was just done at one of the big law firms in Omaha. Now, we didn't participate in that. They decided to do it on their own, and we were on standby if they needed help or had questions, but they had a lunch hour question answer session. And so one of the things I want to note about that is that sometimes then attorneys will pair up and work as a pair or work as a team. And I have found that to be incredibly, incredibly helpful for attorneys who particularly feel like, oh my gosh, I don't necessarily know how I would answer this question, but let's talk about it, you know, as a group, and let's formulate a question or an answer that we think is going to be very helpful to this individual. Or the other thing I've seen is attorneys who don't practice in a particular area, but have enough of the general, right? It's like, okay, well, we went to law school. Here are the general things we learned about, you know, landlord-tenant law or whatever. And so they will say, okay, so generally speaking, here's how this works in Nebraska. Now, you know, if you want further information, I may need more information from you to answer that question, but here's the general gist to basically get them started.
Absolutely. And I think that it's a great idea to pair up if you can, because of that, just the comfort level of, am I right on this? I don't practice this on a daily basis. And you both get your hours. And I guess it's one thing that I'm a big fan of talking about. I know it's on the website, the pledge.
Yeah.
ABA many, many years ago came out with the model of attorneys should pledge 50 hours of public service a year, and you know, your pro bono practice service a year. And it's not a requirement here in Nebraska. I think it may be a requirement in some states. Maybe it's 40 hours or something like that, or 20 hours, whatever. We don't have any requirement here in Nebraska, but there's that pledge that you can give on the website saying, I will do this. I'm committing to do this, and I'm working with VLP to make that happen.
Yes, you're correct, Dave. We do have that pledge, and we every year get several attorneys who complete the pledge, send it in to us, and actually do 50 or more hours of pro bono work. I can tell you a number of attorneys who are doing 50 hours a year are doing it through Free Legal Answers, and or in combination with either the Self-Help Center, or if, you know, when we're doing a legal clinic, our lawyers in the city or lawyers on the prairie legal clinic, which of course those have been halted at this point as well, but we're considering doing those through use of technology here the last half of the year to the extent that we can make that work. But yes, the pledge is there. You know, you're correct that there is no rule per se. There's no requirement in Nebraska that you do 50 hours of pro bono. There's certainly no enforcement. There's no reporting on it. But I will tell you that we have hundreds of attorneys in Nebraska who are doing pro bono work. They're doing it through VLP. You know, most of them are doing, I would say, at least 20 hours or more, depending upon the type of work they're doing, particularly if they're taking a case from us. If you take a case, you're likely going to get 20 hours in pretty easily. Even our easiest uncontested cases, you can get 20 hours in. And so I want to acknowledge, I know there seems to be a little bit of a myth that attorneys don't do pro bono work. And I don't think that's true at all. I think most attorneys do pro bono work. That's why we went to law school, because we want to help people. And we acknowledge that not everybody has the ability to pay. But the caveat here is, I think that if an attorney doesn't do pro bono work through VLP, there's this stigma, or there's notion that they're not doing pro bono work. And again, I don't think that's true at all. They're just doing it in different ways. And I think that attorneys are often doing pro bono work when they don't know they're doing pro bono work. I have more attorneys say to me, I had no idea that reduced fee was pro bono work, right? So I do think if we had a reporting system, it would go on, a lot of it would go unreported at this point, unless there was a lot of education around what counts as pro bono.
Absolutely. I'm thinking back a few years ago, you know, the Young Lawyers Division of the Omaha Bar Association essentially asked people to report what they were doing that was this public service, you know, and we came back, I think, with over 3,000 hours on 150 people that reported. And a lot of them had the same thing. I didn't realize that, you know, that was considered, you know, public service pro bono work that I was doing. And we were just shining a light on what they're already doing, really, you know. And so we're big fans of the profession of our lawyers and what they do. So absolutely, nip that in the bud. Attorneys are doing great work.
Yes.
Not reporting it, but it's still great work. You know, you talked a bit about COVID, and we haven't talked that much about it directly, but how are you seeing the needs changing based on what's going on right now? We have an economic crisis, we have a health crisis, we have people that can't, you know, work and things like that. Constitutional issues all over the place that hopefully we do a chat here with Dan Smith and Mike Gooch about. We've been seeing if we can talk about the big constitutional issues, but right now, what are you seeing in terms of who's applying for help through the service? Maybe what you're hearing from legal aid and WCA. Is that need changing, or where's the need right now?
That's a really good and interesting question, Dave. And if you'd asked me that question, you know, 2 months ago, it would have looked vastly different. And it's, you know, just navigating these waters for everybody right now is a challenge, and you never know where you're going to end up. So even as what I say today, you know, a month down the road from now might look a whole lot different. But before I comment on that, I do want to thank the private attorneys. You know, you talked about they're doing great work, and they are stepping up. I mean, we are making the call to action, and they are really stepping up. I've had more attorneys reach out to me in the last 2 months to say, hey, I know we're in a pandemic. Please tell me how I can help, right? So a huge kudos to all of you for all of the fantastic work. But with respect to what are the needs? So I got that question about 2 months ago. And the answer at that time was, well, this is a really interesting time. We're still seeing basically the same requests for services. There wasn't much of an uptick, but the way, you know, and I still talk with my good friends at Legal Aid about what are you seeing, what's going on, and because we coordinate so much of our pro bono programs with them. And we had basically surmised that, you know, when there's a major crisis or a pandemic, you know, last year with the floods, it's as if there's probably a 2 to 4 week period of time where it's the calm before the storm. So we were still getting the same types of requests initially, but not a significant increase in the number. But since that time, we have now seen, you know, the upward trajectory of not only of cases coming in, but in specific areas. So generally speaking, the major areas that we are seeing right now is anything related to financial matters, right? So we're getting, and we were initially getting some employment law related questions. Well, we now have a lot of them. Anything to do with debt collection. So, you know, we've got people out of work. People are out of work. Some folks didn't get their unemployment money very, very quickly. Some folks are still waiting on unemployment. There's, you know, so there's debt collection issues. There's major child support issues, as you can expect, right? You lose your job, you can't pay your child support. And then it's like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Am I going to be in contempt of court? Are they going to throw me in jail? Are they going to take my driver's license? I mean, you name it, we get those questions. So those have been the biggies for the most part. On top of general family law. So I would say initially we saw a few questions around visitation and parenting time, you know, how how do I enforce my rights? Can I enforce my rights? Can I travel across state lines to see my kids? You know, all sorts of issues there. That has significantly increased. And I don't expect that to change. Divorces and custody cases, generally speaking, were sort of quiet. We didn't have a significant increase in questions in those areas. But I would say once May 1st hit, we saw a huge increase in those. I mean, it's almost as if folks were really trying to just hunker down and weather the storm at first. And now I feel like folks feel like we've weathered it. And to some extent, you know, we're opening things back up. School's going to start pretty soon. So we're loosening things. And as we loosen things, people's legal issues start to really basically take priority or become a priority because there's a financial crisis that they're dealing with. So I will say, generally speaking, you know, we've always had some work around domestic violence issues, protection orders. Those are on the rise right now. You know, when you put folks living in the same space and you kind of, you know, enforce that for any period of time, if there's any violence, domestic violence or abuse whatsoever, that's probably going to escalate. And so we're seeing that. We're also, of course, seeing a huge uptick in housing issues. You know, so prior to May 1st, we had that executive order in place, the governor's executive order. That was basically requesting a halting of eviction cases being heard. The executive order expired, and when it expired, those number of hearings started to increase. Well, now we've got the CARES Act that has been in place and that has been protecting certain tenants living in certain housing units, right? That's in place until July 25th, which is, you know, now right around the corner. At this point, we haven't heard of any extensions of the CARES Act related to the housing moratorium. I don't know that we're going to. So I suspect, you know, July 26th, we're going to see a major rise in housing and eviction cases. And so I think, you know, in the foreseeable future here, the areas that we're going to really see get hit hard are going to be housing. And of course, you know, debt collection as people continue to be unemployed. And debt collection can also include, of course, child support. So now we have cases ready for referral under all of these substantive areas, including employment. We still have a few employment related matters, but I expect those numbers in the next month or two to just grow exponentially.
Oh yeah, well, and we had Scott Mertz from Legal Aid Housing Project on maybe it was about a month ago, and we discussed the CARES Act, federally connected evictions and the moratorium on that in detail. And there, you know, subsequent to that conversation, there was some victories for legal aid in stopping an eviction because they couldn't prove that this wasn't a federal loan that they have in this property, and so that sort of stemming of the tsunami of evictions, and I have a soft place in my heart for this area because it just seems to me like it's a train coming down the tracks very quickly, and so I think attorneys as problem solvers are going to hopefully be part of the solution here to figuring out how to not have many homeless families from evicted places, but also obviously landlords need to you know, charge rent and get paid to cover their costs too. So tough situation there. The family law stuff, really, I get it. It makes so much sense that there's all this stress on households, and you're going to have domestic violence issues certainly coming up more and more. You know, the stress of the situation generally leads to abuse, and there's been concerns that maybe underreporting on you know, child abuse because the kids aren't in school, and that's usually where you'd you'd come across, oh, this child was abused, you know, let's work to get them out of the home or investigate. And since we don't have school in person, and that's been an issue, but also spousal abuse is on the rise, and the tough situation when you feel like you can't leave, you know, you can't leave the household because of this. So we're boiling, we're almost boiling here with a lot of legal issues, needing a lot of help with people that can't afford it. And I'm just so thankful that VLP does this work on a daily basis. I know that the lawyer referral service for the Omaha Bar Association gets thousands of calls a year forces to afford an attorney, but if they don't deal with their legal situation, it's going to be incredibly difficult. And so I'm very thankful that the resources there to take all these volunteer attorneys and have them do this good work. So thank you for all the work that you're doing out there. I've worked through all my questions, Laurie, but I want to give you opportunity to highlight anything that I've missed about the work the VLP is doing, or what you want attorneys to know, and how they can get involved.
Sure. Well, thank you for giving me that opportunity, Dave. And again, I want to thank you and all of the others who have done such great work and have really stepped up to help with what you call is the tsunami of legal issues that are coming. We're boiling, but I expect that we're going to boil even harder here in the next month or two to come, particularly as school starts. And I think that there's, you know, we're going to see, I hate to say it, but I think we're going to see less social distancing and possibly another surge of the virus, which will create all sorts of, you know, delayed and continued and even worsened issues. But I think the big thing for VLP right now is, you know, we always have cases ready to refer to private attorneys. And as I mentioned just a few moments ago, we have them in all of these different substantive areas. We keep that number pretty well under control, but I expect the number to rise. And those cases can be found through our website. So neblp.org, you can log in anytime and look to see which cases are available. Of course, there's almost always more available in Douglas and Sarpy counties than anywhere else in the state, because Douglas County is the most heavily populated. The other way to easily get involved, like I mentioned earlier, is through Nebraska Free Legal Answers. And the extra help there is really needed at this time, because the folks who would otherwise visit the self-help centers are being directed and have been directed to Nebraska Free Legal Answers. So the number of questions tends to be on the rise. And again, I think once we see kids in school, that number is going to increase. For two reasons. Number one, because I do, again, have a concern that we're going to have more issues with COVID, or more extensive issues with COVID. And number two, it's, you know, I think as humans, we tend to prioritize, right? And when we are working with our children and our families and having to tend to business there, we often can, you know, put on the back burner a potential legal issue, something that's not, you know, a major crisis at the time. And once kids get back in school, we usually see a surge of cases and issues crop up. And so I anticipate that's going to be the same this year, and maybe even worse as because of COVID. I don't think I mentioned it before, but we partner heavily with Legal Aid of Nebraska to provide our pro bono programs. So we do that in concert with them. So the cases that we get are, generally speaking, cases that have come from Legal Aid of Nebraska. There are cases that they can't help with, and for a variety of reasons, mostly due to capacity, but there could be a conflict of interest as well. And so, you know, I can't begin to say that we're ever going to be able to fill the need, but I would say we're taking a really good shot at it, and we're doing that through the help of volunteer attorneys like you, Dave, and those in the Omaha Bar Association who've been so gracious to basically stand up and help. I do think that one of our biggest challenges going forward is going to be in the landlord-tenant area, and you had mentioned that earlier, as had I. We don't currently have really a collaborative structure in place in Omaha, similar to the structure. There's a collaborative structure in Lincoln right now, where VLP is able to facilitate a program out of the Lancaster County Courthouse called the Tenant Assistance Project. We are working in concert with others through a collaboration there, and recruiting volunteer attorneys to help and to be at the courthouse to provide that, basically that attorney of the day or limited scope services to tenants who are being evicted. That particular program doesn't exist yet in Douglas County. It may. There's been some talks about it, but nothing formal has been set up. But until then, what we're going to have, or what we're going to see at VLP, are going to be cases coming from legal aid. Obviously their capacity is limited just as any other nonprofit is. And so the cases that they're not able to take on and the tenants they're not able to help are going to come to us. And so we're going to be reaching out, looking for lawyers who are willing to step in. These cases generally can be resolved through some basic negotiations with landlords. We've had great success in Lancaster County negotiating with landlord attorneys. A lot of times it's just getting that tenant a little more time so that they have time to find another place to go. And what we often find in those cases is when they've been given that little extra amount of time, they're able to leave the unit within the amount of time and leave it in good shape. And so we're hopeful that here in the near future, at least in Douglas County, there can either be a similar type of program or at least attorneys, volunteer attorneys who are willing to step in and hopefully do some basic negotiating with landlord attorneys in those types of cases. So those are, other than everything else I think I've mentioned, those are really kind of our biggest challenges and our biggest needs right now. And we greatly appreciate any help we can get. And folks can always feel free to reach out to me. You can easily find me through the VLP website or through the bar directory on the NSBA's website. You can easily find me. And so I want to make sure folks know who to contact, and I should be your first point of contact if you're able to help, if you're able to step up and help.
Well, you and your office are the ones that make me feel proud to be an attorney, proud to be part of this profession, and giving me opportunities to do some of that volunteer work myself to add my piece to this whole process. So thank you for that. Even going back to this one more time, if somebody's evicted, and this is what talking to Scott Mertz and also a legal aid luncheon last year when they were talking about this, if a person's evicted and they can't find another place because they've been evicted, it's on the record, the downstream effects for that could be loss of a job, thousands of dollars out on personal property that maybe they couldn't pick up after being evicted. It can be tens of thousands of dollars of a weight of things that can happen to that person because they were evicted. It's not just that they're evicted, but it is putting them in a financial hole that is very tough to dig out of if you're paycheck to paycheck or even worse. And I guess if we can resolve this situation without having an eviction on the record, without having that adversarial process come to a head so much, it can lead to really not having the homeless population increase. And so I want people to understand how important it is to try to help in that situation. And so I'm thankful that you're working on that, and we're here to support that completely, because we want everybody to win. We want the people to not get evicted if they have to move out, and that's understandable. We want the landlords to be able to release, and everything like that. So it's a tough situation, but trying to thread that needle is so important, I think, instead of having a homeless population that then has public support services. And I could go into the policy and all that, but I've already gotten into too much, but thank you. Thank you for all that. So
you're very welcome. And everything you said there, Dave, is absolutely correct with respect to evictions and homelessness. I just want to add that, you know, it impacts us all. Having one person homeless impacts us. And I think, you know, and homelessness can sometimes also result in the removal of children from your care, which can be devastating, absolutely devastating. And so, and nobody wants to see these things occur. And so, you know, again, it's just that reminder that it impacts everybody, not just one person, and anything that we can do to help ensure that that doesn't happen in our, you know, our communities don't, you know, take the brunt of that. We're there to do, and we greatly appreciate your support in that as well.
yeah. Well, I know you have plenty of stuff to do, and I've taken way too much of your time, but thank you so much for meeting with us today. We'll get this on the social media and promote it out there, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Thank you so much, Dave. I greatly appreciate it. And on behalf of the LP, I also want to thank the OBA for all you do as well.
Happy to do it. Thank you, and have a great day.
You too. Thanks.
Bye-bye.